Let me hit record, my bad. So this is considered an index view, and we're going to talk about routing this morning. The reason I bring that up is because another feature that we're going to throw in here is when I click on an individual to-do, I can go to the specific information for that single to-do. So yesterday we talked a little bit about, in our routes, kind of these wildcard routes, for example, :ID. And if you look at the URL here, when I go to this get beer to-do, it has an ID of 0, right? So we're not hitting a database yet. However, I do have an array with 3 to-dos inside it. This is the first or the 0 index to-do in my array. Now, when we talk about RESTful routing, when we go to a view that shows the details for one thing, for one instance of a resource, that's considered a show page. So show me the details for one item or one to-do. Let me go back here. I'm going to go back to all to-dos. So I have a link that'll take me back to my index view. And if I click on dry cleaning, which I don't really do dry cleaning, I don't know why I put that in here. Notice that the URL, it's now /1. So this is the second to-do in my array. So it's an ID of 1 for the routing concerns. And again, this is the show page for this specific to-do. Then I can go back to all to-dos. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to add a show view, a show route to see one to-do. We're also going to create, see what it takes to create a form and actually send post data to our server to persist a new to-do. Well, we're not technically going to persist it today because we're not adding a database. If I restart my server right now, the new to-do that I just added is going to disappear. Let me show you guys that. So right now I have 3 to-dos, but when I go in here, and if I stop my server, and I restart, and I refresh, then I have my original hard-coded 2 to-dos. So this is one reason that we want to add a database so we can actually persist this stuff in the long term. But right now, today, whenever we refresh, whenever you add some code and NodeMon restarts your server, just be aware that it's going to wipe out those new to-dos. So there we go. That is our fully baked app for today. So that's the Today Show version. Now, I want to, let me paste in a little bit of an intro, and then I'm going to get you guys set up with this starter code. So let me stop my screen share for the moment. So far we've created routes in Express. That's what we did yesterday. And we passed parameters, attached them to our attached them to our request when we sent a request to the server. So we've constructed views yesterday using handlebars. We can dynamically put JavaScript variables and data into those views. We saw how to do that. Today we're going to kind of complete that thought by creating a form so we can actually send new form data to our server. So that being said, let's open up the starter code that I put into your repo. And here's where you can find it. It's going to be in today's folder, in the Student Labs folder, and it's called Starter Code HBS. And you guys can work on this directly out of that Student Labs folder if you want. I'll push a solution version. I'll put it in the instructor examples folder later today once we go through the lesson. But this starter code will just help us get bootstrapped a little quicker this morning. So what I'd like you guys to do is let's go ahead and get that set up. I'll put that here into Slack. So CD into that starter code HBS app folder and then run the npm install. So does someone want to come on mic and explain what npm install is going to do for us?
It's going to install. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love the enthusiasm. Sorry, go ahead, Pedro.
Okay.
Or Sean, who was answering? Sorry, go ahead.
It's going to install the Node package manager in the Node environment.
That's pretty close. You had some really good words in there, some good concepts. Can someone else kind of elaborate and build on top of that?
Follow dependencies.
Oh,
go ahead, John.
JSON file. Yeah, same track. Yeah, create the JSON file with all the dependencies in it.
So does npm install create the package.json, or does it just read it?
That's a good question.
So what was the command yesterday that actually created, instantiated, if you will, that package.json file?
npm init.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so remember npm init, that's kind of like the first command that you want to run when you're scaffolding a Node app. So that creates the package.json, which, by the way, you could technically, touch that file and put all that information in there, but it's just easier to run npm init if you want to put in data for all those questions, author, description, main file for the app, things like that, testing commands. You can put all those in there. So package.json is the instructions, the record, the recipe, if you will. It lists all of the dependencies that app is going to depend on. So when you run npm install, npm is going to read that file. It's going to say, oh, I need to install Express. Oh, I need to install Handlebars. So it's going to go and grab those modules. In addition, it's going to grab all of the dependencies that those modules depend on. So we saw yesterday, and you can take a look when you run npm install, you should see kind of the status in your terminal. There's a lot of packages that these other modules depend on, and we really don't have time to keep track of all that stuff. So we're going to let npm manage it for us, particularly if a package has been updated, or maybe a package has been replaced or something. npm is really good about having the freshest information for our different modules. So we just want npm to manage all that stuff. Richie has a question.
Yeah, when I actually just opened my terminal and started to navigate, I always just happen to do like git status just to make sure that there's nothing going on before I get started on something else.
Okay.
And I had something really weird pop up initially.
Okay.
And I was kind of curious about it. I'll show you.
Okay. For the rest of you guys, if you do get into the starter code, successfully npm install, and then test it out by running nodemon server.js. So for this application, server.js is going to be the main entry point to our app. It's going to be the brains of the operation. Yesterday, we named that file index.js. Today, in this starter code, we're just naming it server.js. So make sure that you do a nodemon server.js. So once you get that up and running successfully, please give me a thumbs up into Slack. If you're having any issues, you may want to do a git pull upstream master. Maybe if you can't find that app folder, you may want to do that just to be sure. I pushed the starter code last night, so I think you guys should have a copy of it locally, but just to make sure. Zach asks, should we open a local host? Yeah, so when you run nodemon server.js, it automatically is going to open up localhost. So for you guys, if you want to go to localhost :3000, I'll put that here into Slack. So localhost 3000 should be kind of that main. It should say, this is our home page. Very simple. Cool. Richie, please proceed. Sorry about that.
Yeah, can you hear me? I can't tell if I'm...
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, you see what's popping up with my git status?
Can you scroll up? What was the command that you ran? Or what? Give me a pwd. So it looks like you're in your root directory.
Yeah, this is initially I opened my terminal, just typed in git status, and this popped up.
Okay. Well, it looks like you git initted your home directory, which you probably, it's not like a deal breaker, but you probably don't want to do that. We can deal with that later at break. It's not gonna.
Okay. I wasn't sure what was going on with this, and I didn't want to start doing even more stuff that was going to make it more complicated later.
Yeah, you should be fine. It looks like you accidentally ran a git init in that home folder. If you want to just blow that up, you can just delete your git directory. So you can do it right now if you want.
Yeah, sure.
rm space capital R F.
F is capitalized as well?
Sorry, dash capital R lowercase f.
Like so?
Space, and then dot GIT. Yeah, try that and see. Okay, now do a get status. Okay. Yeah, so you just kind of blew up that hidden folder, no worries.
Yeah, I just didn't know what all this meant. I didn't want to start adding more stuff and make it like a bigger problem later.
Yeah, it happens. I do that stuff all the time. Like, oh crap, I'm on my desktop. I just npm initted my desktop before I cd'd into my folder, you know. Cool, so we have 4 thumbs ups. If anyone else is having issues, you know, feel free to come on mic. We can take a peek. Cool, at 11.
Hey, Mark, just one thing that I noticed.
Uh-huh.
I actually was about to run npm init, but then I stopped it because otherwise that would erase all my dependencies from the package JSON file that you had already put there, right?
Right. You guys do not need to run npm init because I'm giving you the package.json. All you need to do is run an npm install, and then npm will read that package.json and plug in the appropriate node modules. So this is a good example of why we don't want to check in our node modules folder into GitHub, because it's really unnecessary. Because all you have to do is clone this app, and your local npm will read that file and just install the packages locally. So it's really kind of redundant to check those into GitHub. And if you notice, I added a get ignore file. Do you guys see a get .get ignore, kind of a hidden file? Okay. So I put that in there to demonstrate. If you open that file, I put in node modules. So that means whenever I push this code to GitHub, it's not going to push my node modules folder. I'll still have it locally, but again, I don't want to push it up because all I need you guys to have is the package.json.
Yeah, I'm just running a couple seconds behind because I was waiting to get started.
Sure. Yeah, no sweat. So we got 13. Yeah, so ping me if you need any help, Richie. I'm going to share my screen. Let's just take a quick peek at the code that you guys have, just to get a little bit familiar with what we're dealing with here. So again, just want to remind you guys that today for this app, the main entry point is server.js, okay? You can name this file pretty much whatever you want. Just for this app, it's scaffolded out with server.js instead of index.js. And if you notice in the package.json, if you open that up, that this main on line 5, the value for the main key is server.js. So again, want you guys to be aware and kind of mindful and notice that, oh, server.js is like the main entry point of my file. So it's something just to, you know, kind of take note of. Because not every app, not every tutorial or GitHub repo that you take a look at, they're not always going to have a nice and neat index.js as kind of the main file. So, you know, just something to be aware of and be savvy about. So in server.js, so we have a little bit more going on than we did yesterday. And some of this I already put in here that we're going to talk about it, you know, throughout the lesson today. But some of this should be familiar. We're still pulling in Express. We're still pulling in handlebars. We're going to talk about this data here shortly. We still have a var app, which is our, we're instantiating a new Express module, a new Express app. We have port right here. So I think yesterday we probably put this port variable at the bottom of our code. It's really up to you where you want to put it. I just prefer when I'm declaring variables that are sort of application configuration type of variables, I just put them all at the top. I just declare all my stuff at the top. Yesterday it was at the bottom. It's kind of up to you. Right here is an app.use, which we're going to revisit later. So yesterday we also used a .use. Do you guys remember what we used that use method for yesterday? or when we see the .use method, what it represents.
Wasn't that defining like our views port or?
Close. So the views actually were with .set.
Oh, okay.
But that's super close. What did we use the .use for?
To define the repository where things are?
Yeah, actually, Zach, maybe this is where you were going. We used .use once yesterday, and that was when we used the
static asset.
Well, we used it for the public folder. So when we did the dir name and then the public folder to tell Express where to find kind of our public, if we wanted to add style sheets and JavaScript files, that's when we used the .use method yesterday. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about that .use. When you see that .use, it's specifically meant to be a middleware type of functionality. When we talk about middleware, it's everything that happens in between the request from the browser and the response that the server sends back. So there's a lot of stuff that is really helpful, some code that we can put in between those two, request and response cycles. This logger, for example, which we're going to revisit here on line 13, it allows us to log some information to our server logs. And sometimes that's really helpful. Maybe we want to grab some other information from that request object. And so this logger middleware would allow us to do that. We're also going to use something called body parser. We're going to need that to help parse the information from our form. That's also going to be an example of middleware. And we're going to get to that a little bit later in the lesson. We have app.set, that should be familiar. We have one home view, this /, and so you guys should all see something that looks like this. This is our home page when you first fire up your server. And then we also have one index route right now. We're going to talk a little bit more about RESTful routes here in a few minutes. But right now, when you go to /todos, if you want to test that out, you guys should see something like this. You should see just the two hard-coded to-dos here. And so yesterday we took a look at how to hard-code data within our route. Now this morning we're going to look at a little bit more of a cleaner and drier way to do that. We're actually going to rip this stuff out and put it into a separate file, a data file. But we have this seeded to-dos variable, which is an array of two kind of starter to-dos, just so we have some data to render to the screen. So I have this get beer and this dry cleaning. And then we have the res.render. Remember with res.render, it's telling Express that we're about to send a view back, so it needs to look for a view. And then optionally, the second argument, you can pass in the data that you want to put into the view. So in this example, I have a to-dos variable that I'm declaring, or a to-dos property, if you will. And then I'm pushing in the seeded to-dos information. Yesterday, we used a keyword of data. So like I mentioned yesterday, usually if you have like one piece of data that you're pushing in, you may just want to go with the data syntax. But today, since we're dealing with to-dos all day, I'm just calling this property to-dos. And then in my index.handlebars file here, I'm iterating over that to-dos piece of data. So I have two to-dos right now that are rendering to the screen. And then we're doing the app.listen, which is telling the node server to listen for requests from port 3000. And then if you look in your server logs, you guys should see something like, ready to serve hot to-dos. You guys should have port 3000. So I have like the finished code running on 3001 and then like the starter code on 3000. So yeah, you guys should see something like this. Server up, ready to serve on 3000. Cool. So I want to give you guys kind of out of the box, I want to give you guys a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a review from yesterday. So I'm going to paste this into Slack. And while you guys are working on this, I'm happy to, if anyone needs some help getting up to speed, I'm happy to help you out. I'm going to stop my screen share. So what I want you guys to do, take a few minutes. In number one, I want you guys to go into the views to do index.hbs file. And then using handlebars, add some code that will dynamically show us how many to-dos we have. And then I put a screenshot in there. So right now it just says just to-dos. So see if you can add some handlebars code that will actually give us the exact number of to-dos that we have available to us. So it says something like you have 2 to-dos, for example. And then the second thing I want you guys to do just to test that out is add a third to-do to that seeded to-dos array. And that's something that we did yesterday, just to give a little bit of a recap of yesterday's coverage. So go ahead and work on those 2 exercises. Give me a thumbs up in Slack when you get those working. And then if anyone needs assistance, I'm happy to get you guys up and running. If anyone's having an issue, just come on mic or ping me in Slack or something.
Yeah, it's just weird. it takes away the intuitive part and just kind of does it for you, and you're like, oh, am I missing a step here?
Right. Cool. Looks like we have 12 thumbs ups. 13. Cool. So let's move forward. Would someone like to quickly maybe share their screen and just walk us through their process to hit those two exercises? Then we'll move forward. So we already pretty much saw Sean add another object, another to-do object to our array. But does someone want to show us what they did as far as the index.hbs file in the view?
I can do it.
Okay.
Ben.
Share my screen. And kind of one thing that I was in the index.hbs, really all I added was this num to-dos. And then back in my server.js, I passed it as the seeded to-dos.length.
Sorry, can you show us the server.js? So that index looks great. Yeah, all we needed to do, again, just to recap, that anything within those curly brackets is valid JavaScript code. So you can totally call JavaScript methods on the appropriate data type. So in this case, to-dos is an array, so you can call .length on it. Absolutely.
And actually, sort of one question that I had is yesterday we had this layout.hbs, which sort of said everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then our foods.hbs, all it was really this stuff. It didn't have body, it didn't have HTML, it didn't have all the other stuff on it. Which ways is that sort of irrelevant, or?
Sorry, you mean the foods.hbs didn't have the HTML and such on it?
Yeah, it had essentially that. And layout.hbs was like doing the work.
Yeah, correct.
And then we came over here and it just had this little, like the body of it.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, my apologies, you guys. I don't know why that's in there. I meant to take that out. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we do not need that scaffolding in our index.hbs. As long as it's in that layout.hbs, that's going to take care of everything. So if you go to your layout.hbs, we'll take a look at that. So remember that each of those individual templates is going to be popped into the body within the three curly brackets. Yeah, so we only need to do that HTML scaffolding in our layout.hbs. Yeah, sorry about that, Tom. Totally brain farted on that one. I should have taken that out of that file, so my apologies. And that's one way that we can keep our views super dry and light on the code, is that we only need to do that scaffolding in one place in our layouts file. So any kind of CSS files we want to put in there, any kind of JavaScript files, we only need to put it in that layouts file. And then our views files, our view.hbs files, can be super lightweight. Yeah, very cool. And then Sean, we walked through Sean's example of how to add a third object to that seeded to-dos array. Did anyone have any difficulty or questions about that? Okay, cool. So let's move forward. We're going to be adding some new to-dos shortly via a form. And kind of the step before we get to that is we want to talk about something called module.exports. So I'm going to share my screen. And what I want you guys to do, I'm going to walk through two steps. and then give you guys an opportunity to add this feature to your app as well. So this is a really important pattern. This is something we're not fully taking advantage of its capabilities this morning. I just want to give you guys a taste. But like I said, Colin's lesson on Friday, we're going to be using this this feature, module.exports, to try to dry up our app and put all of our routes inside of a separate file, for example. Next week, when we add databases and we add different model information for to-dos or for users, we will use module.exports there as well. It's a very common pattern. And really the great benefit of it is that it dries up our code. Eventually, as this app gets more complex, it's really not going to be in our best interest to have all of this code in our server.js file. That's going to be really unmanageable, and it's not really a best practice. We want to have a separation of concerns. So eventually, we want all of our routes maybe in separate files. We want all of our models and database information in separate files. That's really the best practice as you scale up your apps, this idea of a separation of concerns. One way that I like to think about it, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when I do laundry, for example, I usually just have like a dirty pile of laundry, and it's just a pile of dirty stuff, and I put that into the washer. And that works okay, but the proper way to do laundry, if I was really being professional about it, is I would separate my whites into a stack and do those separately, separate my darks, separate my delicates or whatever, or permanent presses, whatever types of laundry there are. The best practice would be to separate that laundry and do each individual stack. That would be the best practice. I just kind of have a dirty laundry pile. Right now in our server.js, we kind of just have a dirty laundry pile of code. And it's not that bad right now because our app is pretty light. But as we go through this unit and for your projects and subsequent units and Angular projects and the full main stack, it's really going to be unmanageable. So we really want to get into the habit of separating out our code. And one way to do that is using this module.exports object. So that's why we're going to talk about it this morning. So as an example, what I want to do is we're going to take out that seeded to-dos array. It doesn't really belong in our route itself. We want our routes to be as skinny and lightweight as possible. Right now, it's not the end of the world if we have 2 seeded to-dos within our route, but the best practice would be to put that in a separate file. So let me share my screen and I'll show you how we're going to do this. So step 1, let's remove the seeded to-dos data from our server.js to our data.js file, which is right here. So you guys should already have access to this file. And if you open that file up, right now it just says a module.exports, and you can see that it's an empty object. So that should give you a little bit of a clue as to what this module.exports is. Module.exports is nothing more than an object that you can share between different parts of your application. So I can put information in here in this object. I can attach properties. I can attach methods. And then I can use that require syntax in any other file, any other part of my application, and I can pull in whatever's included in this object. And that's really the beauty. So we could put all of our routes in one of these in a separate file and then pull that into our server.js. Next week we're going to put a lot of our database information into one of these objects and then require that in our main server.js file. So that's kind of the idea of this pattern. So what I'm going to do is let me grab this seeded to-dos. I'm just going to rip it out of that /to-dos route because I just want to make this a little cleaner, a little more manageable. So I'm going to dump it right in here. And all this is an object literal, like you guys have done all over project 1. So let me tidy this up a bit. So I'm going to need to have a colon there, which is the correct syntax. So now my module.exports is going to have a seeded to-dos property, and that property is going to be my array of seeded to-dos, and I just have 2 of them right now. So that's great. So step 1, we cleaned up our server.js file, so now our route is a little cleaner, which is pretty nice. But the next step is I actually need to tell my server.js file about this data.js. I need to let it know about this module.exports. So the way that I'm going to do that, and you guys should actually already have this code in your server.js. So if you look up here around line 6, you should see that I'm declaring another variable called data. And I'm requiring that data.js file. That's what's going to be attached to this variable. Now, it's requiring that file, but more specifically, it's requiring whatever this module.exports is. So now, this data variable is going to be this object. So it's kind of like I could essentially, this is a little janky, but it essentially would be something like this, if that makes sense. So it's as if I'm making this data variable equal to the contents of this module.exports object. Obviously, this looks a little janky. That's not really the right way to do it, but that's essentially what we're doing here. Let me redo that. Let me clean that up. There we go. So by requiring this file, what we're actually requiring is whatever module.exports equals, whatever that object is. And right now, that object just has one property of seeded to-dos, which is an array of our 2 to-dos. Cool. Now, the last thing I need to do is I need to update my route. So right now, I moved out that variable of seeded to-dos. I ripped it out of my route. So now, my to-dos is actually going to be data.seeded to-dos. Because data, when I pull in this data.js file, I'm assigning it to a data variable. So now if I want to access anything within this file, anything within this module.exports object, it's going to be data dot the property or the method for this object. So that's why now data.seeded to-dos is going to grab my seeded to-dos from this object in this external file. So this is a great pattern. It's a great way to drive your code, and it's more manageable, particularly as we scale up this app. So let me refresh my page, and we should see the same behavior. So now when I refresh, nothing changed, right? It's just server side, when I'm dealing with the as the SAP grows in complexity, now it's a little more manageable. And I can get some of that logic out of that server.js file, because it's going to get pretty dense pretty quickly. So we want to make sure that we pull out code and make it as dry as possible and have that separation of concerns. So that's module.exports in a nutshell. We're going to be seeing that pattern a lot over the next 2 weeks. So let's take a few minutes and let you guys follow those steps. So go ahead, and in the app that you guys have, you already have the data.js file, and you should already have that line of code on line 6, that variable data, and then the require. But just see if you can take out the seeded to-dos variable, all that information, and see if you can put it into that data.js file. And then make sure that you update inside your route. Make sure that your to-dos, now it's the data.seeded to-dos. That should be the final step to get the module.exports working. So let me stop my screen share. So go ahead and do that. Ping me if you have any questions.
I have a question, Mark.
Sure.
I wonder why my terminal is crashing. It just crashed.
Okay.
I refreshed the page to see the result.
Okay. Cool. Do you want to share your screen?
Sure. Okay, this is what it says here. So this is my export, the data.js file. And then here, I added this to here.
Okay, sorry, let's see. So, yeah, so that looks good. So you updated that. Correct.
And then I did this one here.
Okay, yeah, that looks good. That looks all right. Yeah, I think you just got a message in Slack that should be helpful. So let's go back to your server.js. Oh, well, actually, no, stay right here. So let's look at the error that you're getting in the server logs. So this is kind of like the first place we want to start. So let's stop up. Let's take a look up at the top of the stack. So it looks like it's barfing on that seeded to-dos, that variable seeded to-dos. And it looks like, yeah, it should give you the exact line and column number in your server.js file. So it looks like it's on line 6, column 19. That's where something's barfing on you. So yeah, so it doesn't like your line 6. Where is your seeded to-dos? Where is that? Let's go back to your data.js file. I think that's. Oh, okay. There we go. So we need to do a little bit of manicuring on line 2 to turn this into more of like an object literal property type syntax. So what can we do on line 2 to clean that up? And I think someone helped you out in Slack as well. So.
Oh, really? Oh, where's my Slack? Semi-clone after the last. This one?
Yeah, so we need to change 2 things on line 2. So seeded to-dos is now considered a property on our module.exports. So inside of an object, do we use the equal sign to assign a property, or do we use something else? So we still want to put that square bracket there because it's still an array. But how do we set up that assignment? Do we use an equal sign or some other syntax?
Like this?
Yeah, nice. Cool. And so what else do we not need inside of, well, this object in particular? What else can we get rid of on line 2?
Variable?
Yeah, nice. Very nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, go ahead and refresh and see if that's helpful. Yeah, so it looks like you want to clean up your you have to-dos area if you want to get that count working.
Yeah, I gotta do it.
Yeah.
I got it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we got 7 thumbs up, so that's good. Just go ahead and keep those thumbs ups coming in. All right, so we got 14 thumbs ups. That's awesome. So hopefully you can see the value of this module.exports pattern. Again, it's going to allow us, as our apps grow in complexity, it's going to allow us to rip out some of that code from our server.js or whatever the main file of our application may be. It's going to allow us to put it into other files, which is not only good, it just makes the code more manageable, but also for testing. To get into unit testing and such. It's much easier to test our code if it's broken up into smaller chunks in other files. It's easier to pinpoint issues and to write tests versus if we had to write tests and try to pinpoint an issue in that, if we had all of our code in that server.js file, it would definitely be like a needle in a haystack type scenario trying to debug that thing. So it's definitely a best practice. Let's do this. I want to hop into some RESTful routing, but let's stretch the legs and such before we hop into that. So let's take a 10-minute break. So let's come back at 12:33 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to continue the lesson, hop into some RESTful routing patterns. We'll see you guys in 10 minutes. So I just pasted the screenshot into Slack. Let's talk a little bit about this. So getting to know the code, RESTful routing. So in general, programming is very free form. There are plenty of solutions and many possible and perfectly acceptable answers to solve problems, and we've already seen that. So there's usually, several different tools or several different ways to write code that will accomplish a given job. Sometimes there may be the most efficient and the best way to do it. In a lot of cases, it's just like your opinion or maybe how you prefer to write your code, the syntax you use, the patterns, the methods. But what we're about to talk about is something that is a agreed upon set of rules and conventions that we want to follow because we all agree upon them. And some very smart people over 20 years have agreed that this is the pattern and the way that we're going to manage these processes. So over the last 20 or so years, programmers have developed several patterns to help clarify the purpose and design of routing in the context of HTTP and databases. So the keywords just to be mindful of today are RESTful, specifically this idea of RESTful routes. What does that mean? And also CRUD. So we talked about 4 HTTP verbs. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So those are 4 actions. But there's 7 RESTful routes. So it's kind of like, maybe what's the parable? Like 7 loaves and 2 fishes, or 2 loaves and 7 fishes. Oh man, my years of Southern Bible study, I'm pretty embarrassed about that. But how do we reconcile having these 7 RESTful routes if there's only 4 HTTP verbs that we're using? And that's where this convention comes into play. So the chart that I pasted into Slack, so here's some HTTP verbs that we've talked about. There are GET requests, there are POST requests, update requests, and delete requests. Those are the 4 we're going to play with. Now, the CRUD actions that match to those requests Oh, thanks, Zach. 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Yeah, that sounds accurate. So the HTTP verb get matches a read action. So remember that get is anytime we're asking for data from a server. Generally, that's going to be send me an HTML page or send me some JavaScript, send me some data. I'm getting something from a server. And I want you to pay particular attention to this because your GET requests are the only requests that have a view associated with them. And I'll say that again. GET requests are the only requests that we're going to create a view for. And you can see that here. So the 4 views that we're going to have for GET requests are the show page. So the show page, remember, that's when we want to show one of something. So we're going to add links in our to-do app. So when we click on a specific to-do, it'll take us to the details for that specific page, for that specific to-do. So that's considered a show. An index is when we see all of our to-dos. So when we go to /to-dos in our app, it shows us a list of all of our to-dos. That's considered the index view. Now, the new view, before we can actually send data back to the server to create a new to-do, we need to do a GET request and get the form sent to us. And so sometimes that's a little bit of a tricky concept. It's like I'm sending data. Why is a GET request involved with me trying to send a new to-do to my server? But it's actually 2 different actions to make that process happen. The first thing we need to do is ask the server to send us an empty form that we can fill out, and then we send it back to the server with a post request. So there's 2 things involved with actually writing data, sending data to our server. And so that's a really kind of tricky concept. But we're going to create a view with the form that when we click submit, it'll do a post request to the server. And again, if this is a little tricky, that's totally understandable. Sometimes it takes a minute to sink in. Similarly with an edit. So an edit is the same thing as a new, but when we do an edit, a GET edit request, it's sending us a form, but it already has the information filled in, right? So if I want to update my Facebook profile, again, maybe I changed my telephone or my email. If I wanted to edit my information, I would send a GET request to Facebook and be like, hey, Facebook, send me a form that already has my information filled in so that I can edit the appropriate fields. So I'll change my phone number, change my email. Then I will hit submit, which is going to be a post request. That's going to be an update because it already exists. I'll send an update back to the Facebook servers and it'll update the database accordingly. So there's 2 things involved. We need to get the form before we send it back with some information or some updated information. Post is associated with the create action. So that's the C in CRUD. So we need a post method to do a create on something. And really important, there are no views associated with the create. When we do the create action, the only thing we're doing is sending the data back. And we'll see in the routes, and if you think about the apps that you work with or the behavior, usually when you create something, you get what's called a redirect because a create doesn't have a view. So maybe if, let's say that I'm creating, this is very typical, let's say that I'm trying to sign up for a new website. So I'll fill out my information, to fill out a new user profile, and I'll hit, like sign up. And then you hit sign up. In some apps, sometimes it's kind of frustrating. Some apps, if you just sign up for it, it actually won't log you in, right? It's like you sign up for it, and then it sends you to the login page to actually log in and get into the site. Sometimes that bugs me. There's definitely like authentication considerations with that. But the idea is that when we create something, there is no view associated with it. So we're actually going to have to tell our app, hey, when I create a new to-do, send me to the index and show me all of the to-dos with that new to-do added to the view. Or maybe when I create a new to-do, I want my Express app to send me to the show page and just show me the details for that one to-do that I just created. It's pretty much how you want to design your application. But the important thing is a create has no views associated with it. So we're going to have to tell Express where to send us after it completes that create to the database and such. Update, which Colin's going to talk about on Friday. So there aren't any views for an update, right? So we get that form with the information inside it. We make some changes and we send it back to the server. And then we're still going to have to tell Express where we want to go after it updates our information. And then a delete. If I delete my get beer to do, obviously it can't show me that to do because it just deleted it. So delete does not have any views either. So we'll have to tell Express where to send us after we delete something. This is something that we're going to get a lot of practice with in Unit 3 and Unit 4 with Rails, these RESTful conventions. Let me pause right there before we move forward. Any questions about that chart? Any kind of initial questions about RESTful routes or about this idea of CRUD functionality?
Yeah, I have a question. Just real quick, I think I missed something. Once you create it, it's not necessarily automatically going to be shown, right? So is that the get? Is that what you said?
So, so we would do a get. The way the process would work is, let's say that I want to create a new to-do. The first thing I'm going to do is send a get request to the server, requesting that it sends me an empty form. So there's a get request to get the empty form. When I fill out the form and hit submit, that's going to be a post request. So I'm going to send all of that data for the to-do. I'm going to send it back to the server. Now, the create action, the post HTTP verb, there is no view associated with that because it's not a get request. Only get requests have views. So once we send that data back to the server, in our route, we're going to have to redirect. So it's once you say this to-do to the database, where do you want Express to send me next? Do I want to see all of my to-dos? Do I want to see that one to-do that I just added? Things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's the really key thing, like it says here in this chart. Yeah, there's a nice little, I love those little polls. That's a really nice little Slack bot that Christine created for us. Yeah, so the only time that we're going to have a view is with the GET request. All right, let's take a look at this next little section just to kind of recap. So here's a little bit more information on how this would break down. And this is a very specific pattern. So we're going to see the same pattern in Express, in Rails, in the meme stack in the next unit. So for example, the view, we're going to do a show.hbs for handlebars. And remember that the show, the convention is that that shows one resource. It shows the details for one thing. In our app, it's going to show us one to do, show us the details for it. So in this chart example, if we think about that we're creating a blog application with blog posts, so the show route would show us one blog post. And this is what the route would look like if we were hosting this locally. So you can see there in the grid, so it'd go to localhost 3000/posts, because posts is the resource. But specifically, show me the first post, or show me the post that has an ID of 1 in my database. Or maybe show me the post that has an ID of 2 in the database. So I'm going to put it into Slack. Again, this is kind of a recap from yesterday when we used that colon and then some sort of variable, some sort of argument in our routes. So for this show route, that's where those types of route creation are going to be really important. So we go to /posts and then /ID. So in our code, it would look something like that. So we know we're getting a post resource, then we can just plug in the ID of the specific post that we want. That's how we would scaffold up that route. Index.hbs, that's what we're going to call that view that shows all of something. So if we were showing all of our posts, it would be localhost 3000/posts. For new, it's going to show a new form, and it would actually be this, which is what we're going to create today. So a new route would actually go to posts/new. And that's how the server would know, send me a new form for a post resource. And then finally, this edit route, if we were going to edit or update a post, that's what the route would look like. And let me paste that into Slack. So the example here is post/1/edit, but in our actual route, in our file, again, we're going to use that :ID so that we could put in, give me the edit for the second post or the third post or the 100th post. And that tells the server to get the form with the information for that specific post that we want to edit some of the information for. So those are the routes. And then just let me show you this one more look, and then we'll actually start building our new route and get a little bit of practice with this stuff. So this is a really quick and dirty example of what these routes would look like. This is a pretty bare bones example, but on a high level, this is what these routes would look like if we put them into our server.js file. So you can see that each app.get, I'll ask you guys if you want to put it into Slack, what do all the .get routes have in common? So looking at that chart, what do all the .get routes have in common? Okay, so they all go to /posts, maybe /posts :ID or /posts /new or something. But yeah, what else do they all have in common? All those get requests, get routes. What do they all have in common? Yes, all of them render something, right? So remember, get requests are the only requests that are going to have a view associated with them. And so if you look at these routes, all 4 get requests have a res.render because we're actually going to create a view for those 4 routes. And then in this example, the other 3 routes, your put, post, and delete, it's actually, this example, it's just sending like delete or post or put because they don't have a view associated with them. So today we're actually going to do, res.redirect. So we'll make it a little cooler. So when we do our post route, we're going to put a redirect. So once you save my to-do to the database, send me to the index for my to-dos so I can see all of them. Or maybe send me to the show page for that one to-do so I can see the details for what I just created, that kind of thing. And again, that's kind of up to you where you want to redirect. Just your preference, how you want your app to be set up. All right. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you to repeat that about the response.redirect.
Sure.
So after somebody submits something, that's where you're setting up the redirect to go to.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to build here shortly. So let me put something in here. So let's say that after my post, so a little bit more specifically, let's say that after I actually write to the database, maybe I want, let me put my closing thing on there. So after I save to the database, maybe the way that I want my app to work is once you save something, maybe I want to go back to that main to-dos page so that I can see all of my to-dos. So maybe I'd want to do like a redirect to my index route. So maybe I'd want to see all of my posts like so. And actually a little bit more specific, a little bit of a cooler way to do this, let me update that, is I would actually, probably the cleaner way to do it, I would just pass in the actual route that I want to go to. So this would be a little cleaner actually. So redirect to the /posts route. And so a redirect is automatically going to be a get. So after it saves something, it would redirect to that /post route, which is attached to sending the index view with all of my to-dos so that I can see all of them. Or maybe I'd want to see, maybe I want to see the details for that one thing, that one post that I just created. So maybe I'd want to redirect to something like this. Oh man, didn't put the tick in there. So maybe I would, maybe I'd want to redirect to what I just saved to the database so I can see the details for it. But just to reiterate, this is definitely a pattern, and the more that we see this and do this, so instead of posts, you can substitute in, you know, to-dos, users, recipes, movies, whatever resource that you're currently working with in your app. It's going to follow all of these same conventions.
Okay. There was something too that you mentioned in the previous unit in terms of forms, like clear default or
yeah.
So is that more of a typical practice if you're just wanting them to stay where they're at?
Yeah, so what we're doing today, the reason that we use that, I think I forget the exact exercise, but let's say that maybe I want to put a form on a page. Maybe I want to search for something. So maybe I don't want the entire page to refresh. The default behavior for a form is to refresh the page, because the default behavior for a form is to send a post request to the server. And remember that a post request does not have a view associated with it. Therefore, it's going to have to refresh the page. It's going to have to go somewhere or do something. So yeah, using that prevent default just meant, you know, maybe we want to put a search bar on our page and click search and just have the stuff. We'd probably want to do that with like a jQuery Ajax request or something. We'll do that with Angular as well. But maybe I just want to search for a film, for a movie on Rotten Tomatoes, and I don't want the page to refresh. Just go get that information when I hit submit, but don't refresh the page. Just grab that data and plug it into my current view. And you'd have to set up some view logic, you know, to not refresh, but to change the view so you see that new data. But that's why we put in that prevent default, because a form's default behavior, it wants to send a post request, which requires a refreshing of the page. So if you want to put a form but you don't want the page to refresh, that's why you need to like do a little bit of trickeration there. Yeah. But for our purposes, what we're doing today, we do want to send data to the server, and we do want a page refresh. So we're not going to have to worry about that with our exercises today. Cool. Good observation. Faux show. Okay, so let's actually build something. Enough yapping. So there's 3 steps to this creating a new route. Then we're going to create a view with the form and such. Actually, we're going to do that first. So let me walk through these 3 steps. If you want to follow along, just kind of watch me, and then we'll take a few minutes so you guys can add this to your app. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new view that I'm going to put my form into. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll walk through these steps. So I have to create a view that I'm going to put, you know, my form in. So I'm going to do that by creating a new.hbs in my to-dos folder. Now, I want to put it in my to-dos view folder because this is specifically a form to create a new to-do. So eventually, as we build this app out, if I have, you know, users, or maybe I have recipes or locations or something, as our app grows in complexity, we want to separate the concerns. We want to try to partition our logic properly. So I would create a new folder for my users and put all the views into there, or create a new folder for my recipes and put all the views for recipes into that folder. So we want to separate this stuff out. I'm just going to create a new.hbs in that folder. And another thing to keep in mind, another reason that we want to put, if we create new resources, that we want to create new folders, is because this isn't called like new to-do.hbs or index to-do.hbs. It's just index. It's just new. So the reason that Express knows that this new.hbs is for to-dos and it contains a to-dos form is because it's in this to-dos folder. Because we'll probably have, you know, if we were scaling up this app, we would have several new.hbs files. We would have several index.hbs files. But we would want to keep them in a folder corresponding to that resource that we were building them for. So that's another reason we want to separate our stuff out into different directories and folders. Cool, so step one is creating a new .hbs. I'm going to get a very simple form started. I'm not even going to use the fancy Atom tab stuff yet, because we'll build that here in a minute. I'm just going to create the basic outer tags for a form, and that'll be enough for this first step. Then the next thing I want to do, we alluded to this in Unit 1, and now we're actually going to put it into practice. So any form that you're going to use to actually send to a server, it requires two things. It requires a method and an action, and we're going to put that on this opening form tag. So the method is going to be the HTTP verb that we're going to use. In this case, we're going to use a post verb because we want this form data to post to our server and create a new instance of a to-do. And then the action attribute that we put on this form is the URL that we want to hit. It's the route that we want to go to. So this form is going to go to /todos via a post request or a post HTTP verb. So I can put that here on the opening tag. The method is going to be post. And this could be lowercase or uppercase. It's really just what you prefer. I just like doing it uppercase, but it'll work fine lowercase. So I'm going to send a post request to my to-dos URL. So we're going to create a route. We're going to create an app.post, and then we're going to put in that /todos route. So we already have a /todos route for a GET request, right? And that's going to get all of our to-dos. So now we're sending a post request to that same route. So this is how we create those 7 RESTful actions only using 4 verbs, because we're combining them in different ways, and that's a really convenient way to create these routes and such. Cool, perfect. So let's just do this for now. I want you guys to create a new to-dos new .hbs file, and then just get this basic form scaffolding built out, and then we'll move forward and flesh this out in the next step. So go ahead and walk through the steps that I just demonstrated to create a basic skeleton for your app. A basic form skeleton inside the file for our to-dos. Ooh, already see some thumbs ups. I'm gonna stop my screen share for the moment. I'm going to put a question into Slack. Actually, I'll just do a quick visual thing. So this routing concept, it's really important. And again, if it doesn't quite click right now, it's okay, because there's a lot of moving parts. But the good news is we're going to build a lot of apps over the next 2 weeks. And these same conventions are going to be used throughout the course in the next 2 units. But just give me a thumbs up in Slack. Am I being too redundant, going too slow, too fast? Because I don't want to belabor the point if it feels like I'm over explaining this stuff. But give me a thumbs up if this is going too slow, or if you don't want to do a thumbs up, that's cool. Perfect. Good pace. Man, Christine is on it with the polling. It's awesome. Cool. So we have 10 thumbs ups. And it's 1:05, so kind of the plan for this lesson is we're going to go up to lunch, because I think you guys have outcomes. Is it at lunch or after lunch today? I forget. But wherever we stop at 1:30, we're just going to pick this back up in the morning and finish the lesson, because it's a pretty long lesson. So, oh, after. Okay, good. But I definitely want to respect your lunchtime today for sure. All right, cool. So we have 12 thumbs up. I'm going to go ahead and push forward. So now that we kind of created the basic scaffolding for the form, let's actually add some fields to it. So that's the next thing we're going to do here. Let me go ahead and share my screen again, and let's add some fields to our app. So if you just want to watch, I'll give you guys, a few minutes to add this functionality to your form in a few minutes. But let's add some form fields. So we looked at this a bit in the last unit, right? We created input fields and such. So form fields are not that different from input fields. And it's not that different from a JavaScript object. We're actually going to send the contents of this form as an object back to the server. It's going to be part of our request object that we looked at yesterday. So essentially, these form fields are going to convert to key value pairs for a new to-do object in this example. And we'll console log some stuff so we can see this in the server as well. But I'm going to get started. I'm going to type this out because sometimes these forms can be a little dense and hard to follow. But the first thing I want to do, since my to-do has a description field, let me go ahead and start on that one first. So I'm going to create a label for this. And this is going to be a label for my description field. This entire form is going to be for a to-do, but this specific field is going to be for description. And then kind of like our demo app, I'll put description in here. So it'll be description colon and then like the empty input box where we can actually input data. So that's going to be the label. And then let me create my input right here. And actually, I try to keep this as lightweight as possible. So really all that I need here is a description. I could put placeholder, if I wanted to put some sort of like placeholder text, I could put value, but I'm just trying to like put the minimum required information here to keep it a little light. Cool, so I have a label for description, and then this will be the empty box that will capture the description information. Cool, and then let's create our urgency. We're gonna do radio buttons for this. So let me create a label. This is gonna be for urgent. And I'll put urgent right in here. And I'm going to create 2 radio buttons. So I'll just try to tidy this up a little bit. I'll put span tags. So for yes, let me create my input. And this is going to be a radio button type. And so remember, if you remember from like our, we touched on this kind of in our CSS HTML formsy coverage, but the labels and the radio buttons, they need to match up because our form needs to know exactly what these radio buttons represent that we send back to the server. So whether we click the yes radio button or the no radio button, the value is going to be the urgent value on our to-do. So this stuff needs to be pretty specific. So I'm going to go ahead and put the name of urgent. And then the value for yes is going to be true. So remember, radio buttons, it's a binary thing. They're either true or false. And then if you look in the README here, I'm going to make this checked by default. So when I load up this form, it's going to automatically like have the yes button pressed or selected. And you don't have to do that, but we're going to do it. And then let me create this other radio button. Again, the names need to match up because the name field is actually going to be the key, and then the value is going to be either true or false. So the name fields on these input fields, the name attribute needs to be pretty exact because that name attribute is going to match up with the key and value pair that we send back to the server. So if I put like urgency here, my server wouldn't know what to do with that because my to-do doesn't have an urgency field, it's urgent. So that needs to be pretty precise. And I'll make this radio button false. So we have true and false. And I think that's good right there for that step. And then let me paste this detail into the README. So this is what it's going to look like when we send this form back to the server. We still need to add like a submit button and stuff, but essentially this form, when we hit submit, it's going to attach this form data. It's going to be a body property on request. So that's what a form does. All this data is served up in this body property. And that's kind of the convention. It's kind of just the way that forms are handled. So we can do request.body and console log this information on our server. And then this form is pretty much going to send an object. So it'll have the description, key, and then whatever value we put into that input box. And then it'll have the urgent key, and then whatever radio button we checked. And if you check right here, notice that it's actually going to send back the value for urgent. It's actually going to be a string of true or false. It's not going to be the Boolean true or false. So it sends information back as strings. And that's just something to be mindful of. So if you're trying to do some sort of logic or equality on the server side, just keep in mind that it's actually a string. So you may need to convert the string or just take that into consideration. And then we could even use dot notation either in our route or server side. So if I wanted to grab the description of this specific, form data, the to-do, I could do a request.body.description to get the value of, in this example, whatever the user wrote in the input box. Or I could do request.body.urgent to get that value as well. So again, this is just going to be converted into an object literal like we're used to, and we can totally call dot notation on it, which is pretty sweet. And this is another advantage of using JavaScript for the entire stack. So everything's written in JavaScript, so we don't have to learn new language conventions and such. It's pretty nice. All right, so let's actually do the submit button, and then we'll take a few minutes, and you guys can flesh out this form in your app as well. So we've got all the fields, so we're actually able to capture the information, but we still need to send it. We need to complete our form. So this is what the completed form is going to look like there in Slack. The last thing we need to add is a submit button. So that's going to be an input as well. And the type is going to be submit. And I'm going to put a value of add to do because I want to make sure I know what this is going to do when I click on it. So I'm going to add to do, and then just a little bit of housekeeping here. You can see it in the example. I'm just going to clean this up because forms can get messy sometimes. So I'm going to put some divs in here just to try to make it a little more visually appealing. So bump that over. And I don't know if you guys have used Bootstrap before or any kind of front-end CSS library, but one of the really cool things about Bootstrap or Foundation or these other really powerful libraries is that they have a lot of cool kind of code that you can grab to build forms. So not only are the forms really nice and neat, but they have really cool styling that you can grab. So that's really a great feature of using something like Bootstrap. They have a lot of great examples on how to set up your form and make them really nice and neat. Obviously, our form's a little bare bones today, but that's okay. So let me refresh. Actually, we're going to have to build the route in the next step, so we're not going to be able to see the form yet. But let's go ahead and flesh out that form before we add the route to render it. So we'll put a pin in it right here. So go ahead and add the code that I did. Go ahead and create that file. I'm going to stop my share. Go ahead and flesh out the form with those input fields. We'll take a few minutes so you guys can finish that up. And I'll paste in this finished form code from the README.
Just to be clear, this is going into the to-dos directory, the new.hbs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll put that here into Slack. Yes, sir. Cool. All right. So we have about 10 minutes before lunch. So keep working on that form. See 11 thumbs up. So I think you guys are pretty close. Let's take about 5 or 6 minutes. I'm going to put a challenge into Slack. I want you guys to take a stab at actually creating this new route yourself. So again, what type of HTTP verb are we going to use to render this new.hbs in the form? What type of request are we going to use? You can put it into Slack if you want, or come off mic. Perfect. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, we're going to use a GET request. That's awesome. So let me put this into Slack. So what I want you guys to do is create the route that will render this form, that will render this view. We're not going to have time today to wire up the post part of it, but I think we can do this in the next 10 minutes. And I put some starter code here in Slack, just some helpful hints. So that's the scaffold. Let me get rid of that JS there. This is like the outer skeleton of what this route is going to look like. But see if you can flesh this out. And when you go to this route, the form should render. And if we can get that done before lunch, then we've done a lot today. That's a really good stopping point. So take a few minutes and hack on that, and we'll get that wired up before 1:30.
Yeah, after we did the form, nothing new was supposed to render on the page yet, right?
Correct, because we haven't created a route. Our server doesn't even know about that view yet.
Yeah, so in the server.js, we have to make like a new variable for like the new.hbs and then link it there to like grab it.
You don't even have to use a variable. So we already have one route in server.js, right, for the index. If you look at that app.get that goes to /todos. So you can use that as kind of a template. If you look in Slack, I also put, this route's actually going to be simpler than your index route. But there are no variables associated with this because we're just sending an empty form. Now we'll put information into the form and send it back to create a to-do, but there aren't any variables associated with this route. We just literally want to render that new.hbs in our browser. But see if you can use that kind of skeleton route in Slack and just fill in where those stars and such are. Just replace those with the appropriate code.
Just wondering, is it supposed to be rendering in our browser at this moment with what we have in here?
I just asked the same horrible question.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not a horrible question. This is really like something to think about. So the view that we created cannot be rendered because there is no route to render that view. And that's what we're building right now.
And I'm sorry,
No problem.
I hate making people repeat themselves. Sorry about that.
No, man. I mean, no, it's all good. These are really like important things that eventually will start clicking. And this is definitely a pattern. So when you're creating a new route, a lot of times maybe you'd want to start with the route, get that working, then create the view for the route. We're just creating the form first. It's no big deal. But in here, I'm going to put a little bit more code into Slack. So maybe this is helpful if you're just getting started. So that's actually the route that we want to hit. So I want you to create a route. So when we go to /todos/new, we're going to see this new.hbs view that we just created that includes the form. So that should be the first part of your route there, app.get, and then that route.
So you were saying that when you do your post action in your server, that the request.body is going to be the object of the data that was passed from the form, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And we'll have to punt on that till tomorrow. But yeah, that's the gist for sure.
Okay.
Oh, show.
Do you mind giving us a solution to this at lunch as well, too, Mark?
Yeah, the solution is actually in the README. All the solution codes in the README, I gave you all of that. I'm going to push all this code up, so you guys have lots of resources for this stuff. I just didn't want to give that to you yet. But yeah, well, it's 129. Let's go ahead and walk through this. So let me, did anyone get it rendering, by the way? Oh, cool. Okay, good. So let me share my screen and I'll quickly walk through it. And then let me put the route into Slack. So this is the route that I used. And remember that, yeah, so Sean's route looks really good. But remember that since we're getting this empty form, we don't even need that to-dos colon data. We're not actually sending any data with the form. All we need is this empty form. So let me put this into Slack. So that route should get you working. Also, if you take a look here in the README, right underneath this section, and I put this actually all throughout the README, I put the working code. So if you want to check it out there as well for reference. But yeah, so you put that route in, so it's going to be a GET request. So when I go to /todos/new, all I want is for this form to render. So you guys need to fill in the request and response arguments. And then we'll do a request or a res.render. And this time we want to render the new view for to-dos, which is right there in the to-dos folder. So that should get you going. And so now when I refresh the page, when I go to /todos/new, our awesome looking form should render. And it doesn't do anything yet. So if you click submit, you should see this message like cannot post /todos. It's trying to go to post /todos because remember on our form, we're trying to do the post HTTP verb or method, and we're sending it to the /todos action or the route. So we haven't created that route yet, and so that's why we're getting this message. But we got the first part working. We're doing a GET request. Send us that empty form that I can fill out, kind of like when you go to a doctor's office, right? If you're like a new patient, you go up to the window, they give you an empty form that you fill out, and then you take it back to the window so they can put it in their database. It's kind of the same principle. So yeah, so plug that code into your app. Let me stop my screen share. And hopefully that gets you guys working. So was that helpful for you guys, that route? Did that get you guys able to render the form?
Yeah, I wasn't adding new on the, like, after to-dos, I didn't add new.
On the path?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I plugged that in, what you just did, and I still can't get it to render, like, within my browser.
Okay. Cool. So let me dismiss everyone for lunch, and then if you want to share your screen, I'm happy to stick around and help anyone.
Yeah, no problem. Just for like a minute or something, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no sweat.
I have
So
just
anyway,
a question, man.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So it's like normally in web pages, so we have the hyperlink to go from one page to the other, like back, forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this one is actually another way. So because when we press submit in a form, for instance, there is no hyperlink, so we have to go under the pipes and connect the pages. Is it a good way of explaining it?
I'm not sure what you mean by pipes, but like we said earlier, when we submit the form,
Yeah,
we're
or
doing
behind the scenes.
So when we submit the form, we're doing a post request, right? And remember that the only actions that have a view are GET requests. So when we send this post, we send this to-do information back to the server, we're going to save it to our database eventually, and then we're going to have to tell Express where to send us next, because post does not have a view. So right now, that's why we're getting this goofy message, cannot post /
Yeah, okay, sorry, I was not
Yeah.
in the context with the database. Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll finish up this app tomorrow. We're about halfway through the lesson, so this is a really good place to stop. I'm glad that we got to this point today. But yeah, I'm going to stick around and help you guys out, but I want to dismiss you guys for lunch because I know you have outcomes. So great work this morning. Have a great outcomes, and I'm going to stick around. Otherwise, we'll see you guys back at 2:30 for outcomes. So have a great lunch. Richie, do you want to share your screen? We'll take a look.
Yeah, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wasn't adding the new on the back of this, which was a problem.
Yeah.
So linked, but I still have everything else, and nothing seems to render.
Okay. So in your browser, what routes, what URL routes do we actually want to go to see that form?
Do we need to go to new as well?
Yeah, /new. Yeah. So there's no magic there. If you look on line 30 in your server.js, Express is listening for something from to-dos /new. It's listening for a request to that route. When it does get a request, it's going to render, it's going to send back to-dos /new.hbs. So
yeah, I totally misstepped the part about like asking it for the next request. I don't know what I was thinking.
No, you got it.
All right,
and then
cool.
if you hit add to do, you should get that message like cannot post to the /to-dos route. And so we'll pick up there tomorrow. But yeah, that's awesome. You got the first part working. That's great.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah, dude.
Mark,
anyone else? Yeah.
Is it necessary to put the .hbs after the new and the render?
It's not necessary because we declared our view engine as HBS. So Express is going to assume it knows that it's going to render it as HBS. So you can put it, or if you don't want to put it, that's fine. But Express knows what to do with that file.
It just works with or without it. So
yeah, even if there isn't any HBS in that file, it's still going to like try to process it through the HBS view engine just in case, because that's how we declared it. Every view is going to run through that engine, whether it has HBS or not.
Oh, okay. Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. Sean, let's see what's going on. Okay.
Oh, Sean. So remember how important our folder structure is set up? Take a look where you're trying to access on line 31, right? It's saying look in the to-dos and look for a file called new, right? But your error message is saying it's not in there. And why? Yes. You got it? It's because it's outside of your to-dos folder. If you're talking, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me find my unmute button with the screen shared. All right. So my to-dos folder should not be in the views folder. Is that
no? That part is correct.
It should be in the views.
Not quite. I mean, it technically is in the views folder, but we want it to be directly inside our. There's only one other folder. Which one would it be?
In the starter code? I only see 2 folders.
Yeah.
Are you fucking with me right now?
No, I just don't want to tell you the answer because I want you to figure it out.
So, I mean, I'm not even really aware of any other folders that were supposed to be made. Is there?
Okay.
This is the same mistake I made yesterday. Is it a public folder?
Clear your mind for a second. Let's look at line 31. So your lines 30 to 32 are good. All right, cool. Looks good. We have the route correctly set up. We have the render. Cool. If we took a look at your browser, right? So we're accessing todo/new, and it gives us an error. Read the first few words out loud.
So, am I supposed to have a new folder? Is that what you're getting at? I'm kind of lost.
No, my point is your file is in the wrong directory. So you're telling it to look inside todo/view and that your new file is within todo/new. But if you click on your to-dos folder, which you did, what file is in there?
Index.
So where is, there you go. So now refresh the page.
Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome.